Ifrit are not a product of folklore. They are embedded in centuries of Arabic, Persian, and Mesopotamian esoteric tradition. Their first mentions appear in early Islamic texts as jinn of immense power, bound to fire, inhabiting deserts, ruins, and volcanic landscapes. Unlike ordinary spirits, they are described as autonomous entities whose allegiance is never guaranteed. They do not serve human whims. They are governed by their own code of existence, ancient and indifferent to mortal morality. Classical texts emphasize three characteristics above all: immense heat that can bend metal and stone, intelligence that rivals sages, and a temperament defined by pride and wrath. The Ifrit's fire is not only physical, it is metaphysical. It burns perception, skews memory, and awakens latent fears within anyone who crosses its path. Manuscripts caution against approaching ruins at night, invoking Ifrit, or lingering in places of unnatural heat, not for superstition, but because proximity alone can trigger manifestation. Esoteric scholars argue that Ifrit were originally conceived as guardians of thresholds, both physical and spiritual. They enforce boundaries, ensuring that the sacred, the forbidden, and the dangerous remain isolated. To summon, to test, or even to acknowledge them without preparation is to challenge an order far older than humanity. Historical accounts are consistent. The Ifrit is not an entity to command. It is a force to survive. Some fires are not meant to warm you. Some flames exist only to burn. Ifrit are not shapeshifters in the romanticized sense. They are physical, tangible, and overwhelmingly formidable. Classical descriptions depict them as towering forms wreathed in flame, their bodies blackened like charred metal, glowing with embers that pulse like a heartbeat. Their eyes burn like molten gold, observing everything with dispassionate intelligence. Hands and feet appear to smolder, leaving scorch marks wherever they touch. Even their shadows ripple unnaturally, as if the heat they radiate distorts reality itself. They are not static beings. Movement alone amplifies danger. When an Ifrit walks, the air thickens with heat, stone cracks, metals warp. In some accounts, approaching one produces hallucinations, whispers, visions of fire-consuming landscapes, or the sensation of being smothered in smoke. It is not illusion. It is an effect of their presence, an extension of their fiery essence into the mortal plane. Manifestation is not guaranteed by ritual. Even accidental proximity, entering a forbidden ruin at the wrong time, witnessing an unnatural fire, can provoke an Ifrit's awareness. They are drawn not by summoning words, but by trespass, disrespect, or weakness. And when they appear, they are immediate, terrifying, and often fatal. Esoteric manuscripts stress that the Ifrit's fire is dual. It consumes the physical and the perceptual. Witnesses rarely survive the encounter unscathed. The body may endure, but the mind carries scars that last a lifetime. They do not ask for attention. They do not wait. Ifrit arrive like wildfire and leave only ashes behind. Ifrit are not mindless beasts. They are intelligent, patient, and bound by a code that is entirely alien. Anger is not random. It is deliberate, often proportional to insult, trespass, or disrespect. Unlike spirits that react to emotion, the Ifrit calculates. It observes the weak and tests the strong. Encounters are rarely chaotic. They are lessons in power, brutality, and inevitability. Their temperament is volcanic, calm until provoked, but impossible to restrain once the fire ignites. Stories from Arabian and Persian manuscripts describe Ifrit responding to insults with cold precision. A single word can trigger a conflagration. A careless gesture can unmake a village. Yet they are not chaotic. They are patterned. Each action follows an internal logic, a measure of balance, even if that logic is incomprehensible to humans. Threat patterns are strikingly consistent. Fire follows their movement. Heat is both weapon and shield. Witnesses report that even when attacking indirectly, through storms, sudden combustion, or wildfires, the Ifrit's presence can be detected by an unnatural rise in temperature, the smell of burning sulfur, or shadows that flicker independently of light. Their wrath is not random. It is systemic, like a force of nature with intent. Interactions are rarely survivable, yet they are rarely instantaneous. They allow observation, intimidation, and warning before destruction, leaving those who survive forever marked, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Ifrit do not strike blindly. They measure, they test, and when they move, even fire itself bends to obey them. An Ifrit is not a thought experiment. It is fire made conscious, elemental yet intelligent, aware of presence, intent, and weakness. Attempting to summon one is not an academic exercise. It is inviting a force that does not negotiate, does not forget, and does not follow human rules. Historical accounts suggest extreme heat is only the beginning. Witnesses report localized fires that adhere to flesh without consuming surrounding materials, burns that resist water or salves, and heat that follows the victim even when distance is gained. One surviving manuscript describes a man trapped in his home. The air itself thickened, his sweat igniting mid-drop, yet the walls remained untouched. Psychologically, encountering an Ifrit is catastrophic. Witnesses describe an overwhelming sense of being watched, a constant low-frequency vibration that attacks equilibrium, and hallucinations of surrounding flames forming shapes or signals. Sleep becomes impossible. Anxiety escalates into physical nausea and memory fractures. Some accounts describe survivors developing long-term pyrophobia, so severe that ordinary fire triggers panic attacks, hallucinations, or self-harm. Environmentally, an Ifrit does not respect architecture. Fires appear and vanish in patterns that defy logic, sometimes erupting in isolated pockets while leaving surrounding structures untouched. Water may boil in one basin while remaining cold in another. Witnesses report hearing voices issuing commands, often speaking the victim's own thoughts aloud. In short, an Ifrit enforces its presence. It is not bound to objects, words, or circles. It reacts to fear, intent, and attention. Every attempt to summon or command it risks life, mind, and body simultaneously. To invoke an Ifrit is to awaken fire with memory, thought, and malice, and to discover the meaning of terror firsthand. You cannot always see an Ifrit before it arrives. It is neither bound by light nor shadow, nor constrained by walls, thresholds, or natural elements. But it leaves unmistakable traces, subtle at first, impossible to ignore once you know what to look for. Temperature shifts unnaturally. A room can feel unbearably hot in one corner while the other remains cool. Objects can warp or smolder without ignition. Small flames flicker where no fuel exists. Smoke curls in patterns that seem deliberate, as if observing or communicating. Sound is distorted. A low hum vibrates through floors and furniture. Whispers echo your thoughts before you can articulate them. Footsteps or knocks appear in rhythm with your heartbeat. Ordinary silence feels heavy, almost oppressive. Perception itself becomes unreliable. Shadows move independently of light. Reflections in mirrors or windows may distort subtly, your image lagging or flinching unnaturally. Smoke, heat, and reflections sometimes appear simultaneously, forming fleeting shapes, faces, or gestures, only to vanish when observed directly. Animals react first. Dogs growl at empty spaces. Birds refuse to enter the area. Cats may hiss or arch backs at nothing, moving in synchrony with unseen motions. And finally, the psychological pressure intensifies. Anxiety escalates. Sleep becomes fragmented. Rational thought wavers. Fear is not instinctive. It is a direct impression, an echo of the Ifrit's awareness. Recognizing an Ifrit isn't a skill, it's a warning. By the time you notice, it may already know you. Encountering an Ifrit is not like meeting a ghost or a spirit. It is not fleeting. It leaves marks that linger long after the initial presence. You may leave a location physically unharmed, but the interaction imprints on mind, body, and environment. Survivors describe sensations that defy conventional explanation. Muscles stiffen without reason. The skin burns from the inside out, yet shows no external damage. Sleep becomes fractured. Dreams are invaded, replaying the presence of fire, smoke, and unseen shapes. Anxiety evolves into obsession, subtle at first, then all-consuming. The mind struggles to separate memory from reality. Objects in the affected environment bear anomalies. Metal may warp. Furniture may crack along unnatural lines. Fire behaves unpredictably, flickering without source. Electrical devices fail in clusters. Lights flash in rhythm with unseen motion. Even water can bubble or steam without heat, as if responding to the Ifrit's invisible influence. Witnesses often report a lingering sensation of being watched, even when entirely alone. Attempts to rationalize, to ignore, fail repeatedly. Rational thought is no shield. Fear becomes ingrained, instinctive, reflexive. Some claim that extended exposure alters perception permanently. Ordinary flames provoke panic. Shadows carry weight. Heat feels like touch. Hallucinations are not always illusions. They're traces of the Ifrit's influence, overlapping with reality. The warning is clear. Contact is not punishment. It is observation. The Ifrit does not negotiate, explain, or bargain. It leaves you marked, attentive, and aware. Surviving an Ifrit is not triumph. It is adaptation. And adaptation is only temporary. Ifrit are not modern inventions. Stories of fire spirits appear in Arabic, Persian, and Ottoman sources dating back over a millennium. They were described in early Islamic texts as beings of smokeless fire, fierce, proud, and nearly impossible to control. Unlike other jinn, Ifrit were associated with destruction, rebellion, and sudden, violent change. One documented account comes from 12th century Baghdad. A merchant reported that a warehouse caught fire despite no heat source. Witnesses swore the flames moved deliberately, almost as if the fire itself had intention. Metal beams bent, goods ignited, then extinguished in unnatural pauses. The fire receded only after the merchant recited prayers and left offerings at the city's periphery, a method later described as appeasement, not summoning. In North Africa, nomadic tribes tell of caravans disappearing overnight, leaving only footprints scorched into the desert sand. Survivors spoke of a wind carrying whispers of rage, and flames appearing on the horizon without fuel. Some described eyes glowing in the smoke, sharp, calculating, patient. Historians categorize these reports as folklore, yet multiple sources across centuries describe similar patterns. Fire that moves intelligently, heat that burns selectively, and a presence that observes before striking. Eyewitnesses in Ottoman Anatolia recorded Ifrit manifesting during disputes. A man attempting to dominate others in his village suddenly faced a fire that consumed only his possessions while leaving neighbors untouched. Scholars note that these narratives are consistent. The Ifrit appears when pride, greed, or hubris escalates, responding with precision rather than indiscriminate chaos. Even in modern times, anecdotal accounts persist. Construction workers report equipment spontaneously combusting in abandoned sites. Witnesses describe an unnatural warmth, shadows that shift against logic, and a sense of intelligence behind the fire. Across time and culture, the message is clear: Ifrit are not random. They are intelligent, reactive, and unbound by human control. The records are consistent. They warn the same lesson. Fire observes, judges, and responds. You do not summon it. You survive it, or you do not. Even the fiercest entities, like the Ifrit, were never thought to be entirely untouchable. Across centuries, accounts hint at limitations, not weaknesses to exploit, but boundaries to respect. Ifrit are elemental by nature, beings of fire and smoke, born from the air and flame. In Islamic folklore, they are bound by natural laws as much as they are by spiritual contracts. This means cold, water, and certain sacred spaces act as deterrents, environments where the flame that animates them cannot fully manifest. Stories also describe protective artifacts, inscriptions of divine names, verses recited aloud, and geometrically precise talismans. These were not magical weapons, but psychological anchors, ways humans created space between themselves and a potentially lethal force. Witnesses recount that even the bravest would never confront an Ifrit directly. The goal was always containment, avoidance, and observation from a distance. Behavioral patterns of Ifrit provide further insight. They respond strongly to pride, insult, and imposition. Historical accounts describe individuals attempting to command or summon them, only to be met with furious retaliation. The more an entity senses audacity or disrespect, the more extreme its manifestations. In modern terms, this could be interpreted as an allegory for boundaries in extreme psychological and environmental systems. When you push too far into forces you don't fully understand, the consequences escalate unpredictably. The Ifrit serves as a symbolic, and sometimes literal, warning. Entities are not neutral, and respect is the only sustainable strategy. Protective practices in historical texts were practical. They emphasized distance, knowledge of the entity's nature, and avoidance of confrontation. Fire was both its domain and its limiter. Observing sacred traditions, maintaining humility, and understanding the elemental associations were considered sufficient safeguards. The key takeaway: Ifrit were never evil spirits to be toyed with. They were forces of consequence. Interactions were survival exercises, not power grabs. And in every account, violation of these limits invited disaster. The Ifrit is never conquered. It is always respected, or it is never seen again. Subscribe.